Welcome to the show. My name is Charlton with Big C. This is Charlton and Big C Sports. Coming to you worldwide on the Big C Sports Network, on the #1 network in the United States of America. And Big C Sports has been voted the #1 sports show in the universe, according to Big C. And them good old boys down south, I want to say bienvenidos to all of our listeners. In Latin America, also across the pond, in London, England, as well as Paris, France. Of course, you good old boys in Canada. We love you in Africa, the Big C tribe. But there's no one we love more than you good old boys down south in the land of the free and the home of the brave on a beautiful February the 11th, 2020. Rondo Deportes, Big C. How's it going for you good old boys down south?
Well, Charlton, it's going wet and wonderful down here in the South, but we want to give a shout-out to the ladies out there on the West Coast at the University of Stanford on Saturday. They won their third volleyball championship, Charlton, in the last 4 years. So the ladies Cardinals are really spiking the balls out on the West Coast.
Yeah, well, we do want to say congratulations to the Stanford Cardinal, and maybe the football players on the West Coast can be next, but it is all fair in love and war. I want to say today's show is sponsored by your Northern California Cadillac dealers, home of the all-new Cadillac Escalade, the standard of the world. And when you go by and test drive yours, tell them Charlton and Big C sent you, as well as a fleet of Cadillac cars. You can also follow Big C Sports, powered by Google and Alexa. Just say Google or Alexa, play Big C Sports Podcast. You will hear from our sponsors. You will hear, welcome to the show. I will introduce Big C as the Mystic, and he will do his thing, and I really appreciate the way things are growing with Big C Sports Podcast. You can also follow Big C Sports on Xfinity, Comcast TV, Roku TV, Apple TV, Fire TV, and a lot of smart TVs all over the universe, according to Big C. And them good old boys down south, we really love a lot that's going on Big C Sports. You can also follow Big C Sports, as we mentioned, on Xfinity, Comcast TV, Roku TV, Apple TV, Fire TV, and a lot of smart TVs all over the universe. I feel like everywhere in California, people are racing. They're racing their drag cars. I thought they may have made street racing legal. Why does it seem that every vehicle has to have a muffler that makes a car sound like a Harley Davidson? Big C, your thoughts?
Well, Charlton, it's affinity with a lot of young people now to have cars that make noise. It's always been that way over the years. I know my first car, it was about having a car that was as loud as possible. You had the glass packs on there, you had the headers, and now manufacturers are turning out cars that make the noise, and you don't have to go to aftermarket parts. I know my daughter has an affinity with cars that make noise. Every time I'm in the car with her, she'll go, "Did you hear that, Dad?" I said, "No, I'm half deaf anyway."
Yeah, I was talking to some car dealers today and decided to come on by one of the lots, Big C, and do Big C Sports Podcast. So every now and then you might hear a car racing by with the 600 horsepower or whatever they put in cars nowadays, Big C. I want to make sure that we also pay homage to our military veterans crisis line, Big C. They're experienced in helping veterans and also their loved ones. For people looking for help, we love our military, but sometimes they need help when they come home. If they have any crisis, they can call 800-273-8255. That's 800-273-8255. Or they can text 838-255. That's 838-255 and get some help. If you are online, just go to veteranscrisisline.net. That's veterancrisisline.net. Big C, why is that so important to you?
Well, Charlton, in this country, as we spend so much time focusing on sports and everyone is listening to the news about the stock market and the economy is doing great, Charlton, there are so many people in our country struggling economically, whether they're military veterans, middle-class families, or just young people, Charlton. The average person in America, if they had a bill that showed up for $400, don't have the money in reserve to pay that.
Yeah.
Many of our military veterans are in that plight, Charlton, of an economic struggle once they return back into mainstream society, and many, unfortunately, have turned to suicide, this horrific disease that has afflicted so many Americans, Charlton, regardless of race, gender, or age. Unfortunately, we have to find a way as a culture, as a country, to stem the tide. The National Suicide Prevention Hotline number is one of those ways, but you also have to have access to that electronic device to be able to call the number, Charlton.
Well, they can always call to get some help, and hopefully their help will be on the way. I can call 800-273-8255. That's 800-273-8255. They can also text or you can text. That's 838-255. That's 838-255. It gets some help. If you're online, you can go to veteranscrisisline.net. That's veteranscrisisline.net, and hopefully get some help. We always know that it's always just a phone call away, and so they can always get some help. Even here, just being by one of our sponsors, and just making sure that, we can take Big C Sports anywhere in the universe and do our show. But there are times where you may hear some sirens in the background, or some good old boys testing out that 500 horsepower car that a lot of good old boys are doing. It's not this is not your grandfather's Cadillac. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, Grandpa did have a Cadillac, Charlton, and, in those days, that was the most prestigious car that many Americans wanted to own, and now all these sports cars have taken the place of that.
Yeah, they've taken the place of that, and they're putting 500 horsepower car and everything. I still think the speed limit's about 55 to 65 miles per hour, no matter where you go, but sometimes the judge will admit that if the judge knows you more than your family members, that's not a good thing. I also want to say, as far as e-commerce goes, Big C Sports is launching a real estate TV channel in the spring of 2020. The goal is simply to recruit 100 real estate brokers to put their property listings on TV. If you're looking at a real estate listing, I know a lot of brokers have their own way of selling property. The old way, Big C, is they would send the new people door to door, knocking on strangers' doors and seeing if they want to list their properties for sale. The new way is oftentimes they'll just go online and see if they can do it. But there's nothing better than TV and trying to get your property sold. We're bringing Big C Sports on the Big C Team Real Estate Channel spring of 2020. And again, looking for real estate brokers telling homeowners you can have your property shown all over the universe. Part of the Big C Team. Looking forward to that. Big C, I know we have so much going on in the world of sports. Everybody loves to have the breaking news. But I know money rules everything. Just like coming to buy a new car, you got to put down some money. But some good old boys can figure out some financing to help you get started. But when you think of money in college sports, I know this might please you, but why does the SEC, the Southeastern Conference, have more of an appeal to the fans and athletes than any other conference in America? At least perception-wise, that's true. But I know down south, it's just hard to find a time of year where you can go on to a radio or a podcast and not hear people talking about football, whether it's high school, college, or pro. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, when you think about the South and the SEC, which is a trailblazer as far as college football goes, Charlton, they do it right. Everybody else is trying to follow suit on what the SEC does, whether it's economics, whether it's publicity-wise. The SEC is in the forefront. And when you make sports a priority in a region, where only in the South it is like that, where sports is a priority.
Yeah. And
it's talked about 365 days out of the year, not just during football season. It's prioritized. And so everybody else takes a back seat to that.
Yeah, it seems to be. And I know even on the West Coast, they're trying to catch up. I know we have these television contracts that are all changing. It seems like they're going to add more, more money is being poured into college athletics. And it's not like it's going to go away. And the bowl game started this with more people realizing it's about the haves and the have-nots. And you don't have to be one of the top schools to get some of the money. But it does seem like the top schools are running away with more of the funding. And I know that's really not going to change, Big C. But when you go south and you go down to the SEC, it used to be also a part of the Southwest Conference in a sense, and they changed it to the Big 12. There's a lot of money in the southern states. And is it because maybe the weather's not always as good, meaning it's very humid, and so people, if you're going to be sweaty, you may as well run around in some football pants? Big C, your thoughts?
Well, I don't think there's any more money than in California. When you look at the economics of California, it has more money than all of the SEC states combined, Charlton. So it's not about the dollars that are in a state. It's about the value of the people that are in the state and what they value the most. In California, athletics is not valued the way that it is down in the South because there's so many things to do and people are preoccupied with themselves more than they are about athletics. It's a lifeblood in the South when you think about athletics. It is a generational thing where families come together about athletics, whether it's grandparents, great-grandparents, parents, the kids, the aunts, uncles. Everyone understands and they live their lives vicariously through that. So many people stay regionalized in the South, and that's what makes it so good. Even when you leave a state, you generally get the license plates of your university put on your state license plate that you're living in, Charlton. That's how big Southern sports is compared to California. You don't see license plates in California having a picture of those universities on there. They don't identify that way like they do in the South.
Well, I think I still see some of that, and part of it may just be the cost of living. Sometime I was looking at, as we're doing our real estate show coming up in the spring of 2020, just looking around the East Bay, and I know you're familiar with the Bay Area, it was hard to find a 4-bedroom house that was less than $1 million. And 20 years ago, you could find a lot of these same houses that are right around $500,000, $700,000. And now we're talking the average, it seems like from what I've seen, and of course these are communities that are pretty much middle-class communities, but you have properties that are selling for $1 million and up. I mean, $2 million, you would think that's going to buy you a mansion, but you're still talking about a 4-bedroom, 3-bathroom homes and part of the East Bay, where the Oakland Raiders are leaving over there in the Walden Creek, Danville, Fremont area. So I think a lot of that has to do with it too. It's just so expensive to live. People don't have the expendable money, and I think that hurts college kids more so than people who work 9 to 5. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, college kids are not looking to buy houses, Charlton. They're living on the university's dollar. They're living on campus facilities. Some live off campus, but they really don't worry about the economic plight. I'm talking about the people who have been there in those areas. When you go into school in the area that you live, Charlton, and you stay in that area, you've normally gotten a degree to support you in that general area.
Yeah.
When we talk about California being the 7th largest economy in the world, that's more than what you have, like I said, in all the SEC schools combined. So I don't see where it's an economic cost of the region as far as housing, whether you support a university or not, because many people who have graduated in California from those prestigious universities live in those general areas. They're just not sports-attuned people.
Well, that may be the case too, but working in mortgages, when someone has a mortgage that's $4,000 a month, and you can go down south in those same communities, they may have a mortgage that's $1,500 a month. It just affects people. And talking to people who are having the chance to take their dollar, their hard-earned dollar, and decide, where does this money go? And there's just a lot of times, even in the professional ranks, and it's a good point to bring this up, if you go to a Golden State Warriors basketball game at the new Chase Center, just here on the peninsula, just south of downtown San Francisco, and you look at some of the rents around there, I'm telling you, for a 1-bedroom apartment for people who work, and of course college kids, they got to have a place to live off campus too, Big C. But for 1-bedroom apartments in San Francisco, it's hard to find a 1-bedroom that's less than $2,500 a month for 1 bedroom. If you got a 2-bedroom, there are people spending almost $3,000 a month for a 2-bedroom apartment. It's a lot like what happens in New York City. So by the time someone has a middle-class income and they want to spend their money, going to see Stanford and Cal Berkeley may not be high on the priority list. And that's from people who've been working for a long time, because the money only goes so far. Does that make any sense, Big C? Your thoughts?
Well, I believe Stanford downsized this stadium about a decade ago, and that wasn't based on the economics of the area. That was based on lack of attendance. You have to look at the stadium that they had. They were never filling that stadium up 20 years ago, 30 years ago, Charlton. So it wasn't about what the economics is right now. It's about what the forecast was 30 years ago. Cal Berkeley was the same way. I mean, that stadium at one point seated 80,000.
Yeah.
I think it's down to 58,000 now. And they never fill it up. So the economics around that stadium have never changed. The housing that's there has always been there. The alumni and everybody else, they just choose not to come to the games, as well as Stanford, one of the most prestigious economic universities in the country. And so you're going to tell me that the people who have graduated from Stanford are living out there as paupers in society? No, they have degrees that get you into that 6-digit job guaranteed when you graduate from Stanford, as well as Cal. But neither one of them can fill a stadium. And if you talk about UCLA and USC, you can't tell me the last time that the Rose Bowl was sold out when it wasn't a bowl game down there with UCLA. They just don't pack it. And Pasadena is not one of the most wealthiest areas in the California to live in. Even in Compton, look at Compton, where USC is, where the Coliseum is.
Yeah.
And so it's not the economics of the city, it's just the lack of interest from the fans in those general areas.
No, I really, this is where I beg to differ. And I ask anyone in the universe, decide if you have It's called diminishing returns. If you could buy a house 20 years ago for $200,000 in the South, maybe it's appreciated to maybe $300,000, 20 years later. But I'm telling you, I've been in real estate 20 years. There are properties in California, in the Bay Area, that you could buy for $500,000 in the year 2000. We're in 2020 now. Some of those same properties, you can't buy them unless you have $1 million. Now, I don't know.
Tell me this, Charlton, when you look at this. You saw the San Francisco 49ers playing in the playoffs.
Yeah.
And they had tickets at that game going for somewhere in the $20,000, $25,000
That's
range.
corporate money, Big C. You know that.
Playoff football game, where if you go to a Cal Berkeley game where you can get in for $45 to $50 as well as the University of Stanford. So that person who bought that $125,000 ticket for that Stanford game could have easily bought 200 tickets for a Cal Berkeley or a Stanford game to go to. So where's the economic plight there when they can afford to go to an NFL game and choose not to go to a college game?
Well, that's when you're done with a corporation. Would you believe that in California, there are people in the Bay Area that make $50,000 a year? That's about $4,000 a month before taxes, and they can't afford to buy a house. When you believe that the average property, as I mentioned, in the Bay Area, if you don't have $1 million and a 5% loan on $1 million, even if you're paying 1%, you're looking at about a $5,000 mortgage payment. So just because it's a high income area, it doesn't mean that someone's going to take their hard-earned money and buy 50 sports tickets for people who can't afford to go. I'm just saying it's the same reason everyone doesn't drive a Bentley. Most people don't have $200,000 to spend on a car. That's why there's more Toyotas and Fords being sold. And that always is a part of it. And that's why in California, there's always this talk about, believe it or not, there's over 100,000 people in California that are homeless. Not all of them are unemployed. And they were doing the thing right now with Gavin Newsom, how to fix the homeless crisis in California. If you can't have a house, the last thing on your mind is going to a football game. I think that's the real deal in California, and a lot of people are dealing with that. And if you had $1 million to buy...
What I'm trying to understand is how does that translate to people going to NFL games? When you have the Rams and they can have a packed house in Los Angeles playing in the same stadium that USC is playing in, USC doesn't have a packed house. You look at the Oakland Raiders who just left, and they would have 50,000 people in a game at the Oakland Coliseum, where Stanford could not get 50 and Cal could not get 50 combined between the two teams for one game.
Yeah.
And then you also look at San Francisco, where they were getting 70,000 people there at Levi Stadium, nor could Cal, nor could Stanford combine a game and have 50,000. So I'm having a difficulty understanding the economic plight when you're saying that they can afford to go to an NFL game where the ticket price is 5 times higher than a college football game.
No, the point is, it's just simple math. If you take $1 million and you can't buy a house unless you have $1 million, the last thing on your mind is, how can I go to 8 football games a year or 5 football games a year? And just 20 years ago, you could get a house for $500,000, a nice 4-bedroom house. Things have changed, Big C. The cost of living hasn't gone up $500,000 for people, and that's why in the major cities, and it goes back to why a lot of people are going to smaller towns, they can't afford to live in the Bay Area. There's an exodus over...
But what I'm still saying is all those teams are still in the Bay Area.
Yeah.
The San Francisco 49ers, and now that the Oakland Raiders have departed.
Yeah.
You have Cal University and you have Stanford University. And what I'm saying is that a ticket for an NFL game is 5 times the price of a college game. And for that NFL, you have 8 home games. And for that college team, you may have 5 to 7 home games.
Right.
At 1/5 of the price. How can they afford to go to an NFL game, and those same people have homes for those colleges as well as the NFL? And think about it, those NFL teams, those fans don't have an alumni loyalty to those teams because they didn't go to school with those NFL teams versus the ones who went to school with those college teams, and that they choose not to go to the college games. That's what I'm trying to get. It's not about the homes, is that it's a preference. You choose to go to an NFL team and support it, and you choose not to go to a college team and support it.
Not necessarily out here in the Bay Area, and I'm sure other regions of the country have the same thing. Levi Stadium was built about 4 years ago. This year's the only time they've had sellouts. Maybe because people found some money to go, but you're only talking 8 games a year, Big C, and some playoff games. But I think anyone that's in the part of real estate, $1 million changes a lot of your extracurricular activities, and I think that's what hurts a lot in the
But
Pac-12
have
conference.
you ever looked at Giant Stadium in the Meadowland? It's 83,000 people, and it's packed every day. And New York, the real estate in New York is much more than what it is in California. But those stadiums are packed for every game, and they have two teams that play in that stadium. The Jets, they don't win. They have a sellout every game.
Yeah.
The Giants don't win. They have a sellout every game. And so when you look at the cost of a medium apartment in New York City, where it's $7,000 for a one-bedroom apartment, which is twice as much as what it is in the Bay Area, and those people still make it a priority to go to the games, and they don't have any college affiliations of any large university in New York City.
If you look at those stadiums, they're not always sold out, and New York City has 8 million people in the city, 16 million in the metropolitan area, and so you have 8 million people compared to San Francisco, 700,000. In all of the Bay Area, there's just 7 million people. If you look at the New York borough, it's a lot bigger. And the point is...
But in New York, you have to have... It's a personal seat license in the stadium. You have to buy the seat in New York, whether you're a Jet fan or a Giant fan. Then you have to buy the ticket on top of that. It's not just showing up saying, I want to buy a ticket for the game. You have to own the seat first through personal seat license.
Yeah.
Then you have to buy the ticket on top of that.
Well, if you just look at math, and I love this conversation, I want anyone to reach in your pocket, and when you go home tonight, if your house costs $1 million just to get into it, would you live there? The answer is probably not. I think that's a lot of things that's affecting people. And the SEC is the least expensive. It's a lesser expensive part of the country to live in than San Francisco, Los Angeles. That's just my opinion, and everybody has their own opinion. I do want to get on the fact that in women's college basketball, you look at number 1 South Carolina. They scored 70 points. They beat number 4 UConn 52 in front of a packed house. Your thoughts, Big C?
Well, it's the thing to figure out who I was going to watch and what.
Yeah.
But the number 1 team in ladies college basketball had a packed house of 18,000. And if you contrast that to the men's side last night, where the number 1 team in the country, the University of Baylor, was playing the University of Texas. And we're talking a large state with a large economic impact, Texas, Charlton. And the people there in Austin have a lot of money and a lot of backing. But they only played the 2/3 of a house last night there in Austin, watching the number 1 men's team in the country, the University of Baylor Bears, an in-state rival, come to Austin and beat up on the University of Texas and could not draw a crowd. They only drew half the numbers in attendance that SEC down in Columbia, South Carolina, with the Lady Gamecocks.
Yeah. I still think when you look at one of the major factors, and people can do their own math. When I talk to families and you want to qualify them for a house, most of them, because if you don't have a place to live, you couldn't care less about going to a game. And I'm still pulling the West Coast into it. I don't know the population down in Austin. But I do believe in this. If you were to do a study in real estate is cheaper in some of those small communities in the South where they may have the expendable income to go pack a gym, Big C. And that's less of a priority when you can't even have a place to live or when you're struggling month to month.
When USC was led by Pete Carroll and they were winning championships, and they were packing the Los Angeles Coliseum, housing was more expensive at that time in Los Angeles than what it is now.
No, that's not true.
Why were they able to pack the Coliseum at that time, over a decade ago, Charlton, versus now?
Big C, you can't find anywhere in the country where real estate was cheaper 20 years ago. If you can, let me know, because I know some investors that want to go down there. I'm telling you, even the Governor Gavin Newsom and even President Donald Trump, they're addressing the homeless crisis in California with working people. Prices are going through the roof. There's no place in California you can find that real estate was cheaper 20 years ago than you can today. It just doesn't happen anywhere. So I told you it's almost doubled in the last 20 years.
I said 12 years ago when they were winning championships. And then all of the population is not going to go to sporting events. You can't say that people who are on the edge of economic crisis had ever considered going to sporting events, and they were not the base of filling stadiums. The people that have been filling the base of stadiums, Charlton, have been doing it for the past 20, 30 years consistently. They've been at the games, whether it's in the South, whether it's in the West Coast, whether it's in the Midwest. Those people that have always gone to games, those boosters. I had a friend of mine years ago who had been a Michigan alumni for 70 years. And he didn't live in Michigan, but he went back to the games every year, especially for the Ohio State-Michigan game. And he lived across country, so he had to travel 2,500 miles just to get to the game. It wasn't about the economics, Charlton. It was about he was a loyal fan. He paid his donations every year to the university, which many people do. But when people choose not to go to games, it's not because an economic thing. It's not. It comes down to what they prioritize in life.
Yeah, and I disagree. Most people prioritize how do they feed their kids, not do I take off and go 2,500 miles across town to watch a football game or a basketball game.
How many millionaires do you figure sit in the stadiums every week, Charlton? Because that's a priority for them. When we talk about people with over $500,000 in income that never go to sporting events because they choose not to, because they don't care about it. Economics is not about sports. Sports is its own horse within itself. People who choose to go to sporting events, it's a lifelong thing. It's something that they choose. People who choose not to go. Guys who are sitting out on their yachts are not concerned about a sporting event. Guys that are flying around in their own private jets are not concerned about sporting events. So the wealthiest of people, if you did an economic study at a stadium and found out the wealthiest people in there, Charlton, they don't all choose to go to sporting events in a general area.
Well, I mean, everybody has their own opinion, but when I was in college, I had 7 roommates, not because I wanted to. It was just...
That's the college life of everybody.
That's the college life of everybody, exactly. So now the same apartment that I rented back when I was in college, Big C, many, many moons ago, that's almost 5 times the price. And even having kids in college now, there's nowhere in the country where the price has gone down, and I think that affects a lot more people, especially when the cost of living doesn't cover for an average middle-class family to afford a home in the Bay Area or San Francisco. Down south, I'm sure it affects people too. It's about how far your money goes, no matter where you live. So whether there's a bigger interest in the South, maybe that's true, but I also say you can't have a hard time finding a one-bedroom apartment in the South in these cities that the SEC occupies, and it's going to cost you, $4,000, $3,000 a month for one bedroom. It just doesn't exist, even in the Georgia.
Look at it from this perspective. Those people that are in those areas that own homes.
Yeah.
And that's what you need to do a survey of. Those people that own a home, not making payments, not trying to acquire a home.
Right.
Because I'm going to assume there's a lot of property out there in the general Bay Area that people have paid for those homes. They have no mortgage on them. But do they choose to go to sporting events?
Well,
that's where the real survey is. Does everybody who has cash flow equity choose to go to sporting events?
Well, I think it just depends on that person. But again, I don't know many people with a house paid off when it costs $1 million to pay it off, and you make $50,000 a year, or sometime in the Bay Area they make it $200,000. But it's just a quality of life. I would still say to anyone that follows sports, find a place in the city or in any of those southern towns that occupies SEC football and basketball programs, and please find me the apartment that costs $3,000 for one bedroom, like you do in New York City, San Francisco, and LA. It does not exist in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. It doesn't exist in Auburn. It doesn't exist in many of those towns. In Mississippi, you can't find a one-bedroom apartment in Mississippi that costs $3,000 a month, Big C. If you do, please let me know, Big C, your thoughts.
Well, you need to go down to Georgia, Charlton, and look at that rapid market and see the price of real estate down there.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure it's changing. Everybody has their own economics to deal with. I love that conversation because as you're talking about SEC and how it may dominate the world of college sports, they're still out here in the Pac-12 talking about how to get more exposure. And again, if they don't deal with the cost of living, I just haven't met the family that's ready to go to a football game than pay their mortgage or put food on the table. But everybody has their own choice. I want to take what's called the Big C timeout, also known as the Big C pause. And Big C, you and I are going to write a letter to POTUS and ask why more people don't forego paying their mortgage so they can go see a football game. We'll be back in just a moment, and we hope that you'll come back and join us in the second half. All right, we are back from the Big C timeout, also known as the Big C pause. You can follow Big C Sports 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on the #1 podcast network in the universe, iHeartRadio podcast. You can follow Big C Sports on Apple Podcasts. You can follow Big C Sports on Google Podcasts. You can follow Big C Sports on Speaker.com. The app that I really love is by Google. And Alexa, just say Google. Or Alexa, play Big C Sports Podcast. You will hear from our sponsors. You will hear welcome to the show. I will introduce Big C as the Mystic, and he'll do his thing, and I really appreciate the way things are going with Big C Sports Podcast. You can follow Big C Sports on Xfinity, Comcast TV, Roku TV, Apple TV, Fire TV, and a lot of smart TVs all over the universe. Also, this is a prelude into the Big C Sports going into also launching a real estate channel that's going to be launching in the spring of 2020, where real estate brokers all over the universe in the markets that we're going to be in, you can put your real estate listings on TV. We're looking for 100 brokers that want to show their area the value of having listings on television. And when people can see the listings on television, it's more likely to make a sale. It's also great customer service for that homeowner. So we're looking forward to that launching in the spring of 2020. Big C, I want to go into this thought that we were talking about. We covered how SEC, why does it have more appeal to the fans and athletes and other conferences in America? I think it's cost of living. Like Sam Jackson said, what's in your wallet? Also talked about South Carolina knocking off UConn, number one.
Well, tell me this part about over 20 years ago. I believe there's about 5 universities out there in California that gave up on college football. I believe one was Hayward State.
No, there's 10.
UOP. I think San Francisco State gave up on it, and a couple other colleges out there.
Yeah.
That are right there in that Bay Area. And you said the cost of housing now is a lot more than what it was over 20 years ago.
Google it, yeah.
And if the cost of housing wasn't that point 20 years ago, why did those universities give up? Santa Clara also was another one. Why did they give up on college football?
Because I know personally there was a bank down in Stockton that had UOP, it folded because they had some bankers that didn't, one guy passed away, and the Spanos family had a lot to do with that university, and there was no desire for certain people to want to keep putting money into football. They wanted to put money into expanding the academic parts of that school, and they did that. But there was also Chico State that lost football. Humboldt State lost football. Sonoma State in the Bay Area, they lost football. Cal State Hayward lost football. San Francisco State. University of San Francisco. Santa Clara University lost football, and that's just Northern California. Cal State Long Beach, Cal State Fullerton. I believe Azusa Pacific lost football in Southern California. So there's a lot of programs that were just hit by economic loss and people who didn't have a desire to fund those programs. Even though they did not close their schools, they just chose to shift money in a different direction. Big C, your thoughts?
So if you don't have attendance at a football stadium, that's one of the major reasons why people choose not to fund. And so if fans are not showing up because you're not putting a good enough product on the field, that's the number one reason right there. If you're not putting a good enough product on the field, why would fans show up?
Well, that may be the case too, but again, it's based on what's in your wallet. It's the same reason that everybody doesn't buy an Escalade. There'd be Escalades all over the place if people could pay the same price that they do for a lesser vehicle. It's all about economics, always has been, Big C. In some of those communities, they lost funding, not because people didn't go to games, they didn't have the TV contracts. I think a study that you can do on your own down south, there's a reason that SEC is getting sponsorship from major networks to sell commercials that sponsor those programs. It's not because they have butts in the seat. You can look at I think it's Arkansas University that lost to San Jose State football just this last year down in Arkansas. They don't sell out either. Ole Miss doesn't sell out. Cal Berkeley went down to beat them. There was not a sold-out crowd. But the TV revenue is what's paying the money. It's not that some good old boy's buying a ticket to go to a game. That's a very small part of why people keep their programs funded. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, it's because the product is interesting. When you think about that, the alumni involvement, you think about television ratings. That's what you sell on, is television ratings.
Yeah.
And when that product is not appealing enough to have television ratings, then the money is not going to be there to back it. When you think about the SEC after this past football season, all the universities split about $45 million apiece from television revenue. That's 16 universities.
Yeah.
$45 million apiece that they split. Then you go out someplace like the Mountain West out there on the West Coast, those universities split $1.8 million apiece from television revenue.
Yeah.
That's the reason why, is because you put enough product on the field that everybody wants to see, and you can sell it to advertisers. Advertisers are what spend the money on ratings.
Yeah.
And if your ratings are high enough, then you get a higher rate per commercial that you sell, just like what we saw in the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
When you can sell a Super Bowl commercial between $4 and $5 million because you have that number of people watching it. The product is good enough that people want to pay attention to what you're putting on air. But when you got games starting and there's nobody in the stands and you're not ranked teams, people don't pay attention to that.
I think that's part true and also somewhat false. Again, you can't find any SEC football program that had a 100% sold out crowd. But what doesn't go away is the TV money that pours into that school, predominantly because they've gotten the better black athletes to go down there. And not all those kids are getting education, but they do play a lot of football, Big C. I think it's all part of the story of where money goes and how money is made. As you know, I want to add on the NFL also, and even Major League Baseball, that rarely has 100% sold out capacity. Even in playoff games, not everybody's selling out, but they're making more money than they ever have in the history of the universe in Major League Baseball. Not because people are going to games, but because TV revenue came up. And whether a team is good or bad, when they have that revenue sharing, you could have 20,000 people in the seats, like sometimes in Baltimore, or 45, 50,000 in the seats, like they do in Los Angeles for the Dodgers. If you look at the Angels, they rarely have more than 25,000 fans down in Anaheim, but they still revenue share based on TV, not based on fans in the seats. Does that make any sense, Big C? Your thoughts?
Well, the attendance in baseball has gone down the last 7 years, but it's about marketing. It's how good a marketing department you have. You got to realize that the Pac-12 has a marketing department just like the SEC.
Yeah.
And it's about who's selling your product and who you're selling your product to. If your product is viable, then you're going to get top dollar for your product. If your product is not viable, then you're not going to get top product for your top dollar for your product. It's just like what you mentioned. Everybody could buy an Escalade if it was the same price. Well, you have to call the SEC the Escalade of college sports because of what they make from their college sports. And you have to call the Pac-12 afford because anybody can afford it. And when you look at what they're bringing in revenue and exposure-wise, Charlton, they're light years behind the SEC.
I disagree with that, Big C. If you look at the bowls and you got, 16 teams in the SEC, there's only 12 schools in the Pac-12 conference, and they expanded Colorado and Utah just a couple of years ago. So if you have 12 schools that are going out grabbing money from a bowl game compared to 16 schools going out grabbing money from a bowl game, if you look at the numbers, the Pac-12 conference won the second amount of bowl games in college football compared to the SEC. So, and that's with fewer schools. They still had 4 fewer schools, but they won the second amount of bowl games over the Big Ten, over the Big 12.
You know what the Pac-12 football revenue sharing was, though, Charlton, at the end of the year?
What was that?
$18 million a university compared to 45 with the SEC, and there's 16 schools. 16 schools split $45 million apiece versus 12 schools splitting $18 million apiece. That's the difference right there.
It might be the difference, but I think for my friends, that I was talking to a coach down at San Jose State today, and they went back and beat Arkansas. So they thank Arkansas for some of that TV revenue. Also, some of my good friends over at Cal Berkeley, they went down to beat Ole Miss, and they're still thanking Ole Miss for some of that revenue that they got because TV's paying more money in the South, and that's part of.
And think about that. The SEC can afford to pay those schools to come in from across the country where the Pac-12 can't.
That's not true. You have schools that come out. Texas A&M has been out here on the West Coast. Ole Miss came out to the West Coast.
I'm talking about year after year. The SEC pays schools $1 million or more to come out and play in the SEC to play games. You can't show that every Pac-12 school is paying schools to come in and play them.
Well, I disagree with that.
Yet every SEC school pays at least 2 non-conference schools to come in and play them and give them at least $1 million to show up.
And I disagree with that. Over the last couple of years, I've seen LSU come out to Seattle to play the Washington Huskies. I've also seen...
But I'm saying last year, what did you see come out to the West Coast? I'm talking about every year, not the past couple of years. Every year, every SEC on its schedule has 2 non-conference games where they play teams that's not in their region to come in and play them.
And a lot of times, as you know, Big C, Arkansas chose San Jose State to come in. And then I think there was a school by the name of South Carolina that chose Appalachian State to come in. And so it's not like they're trying to bring in Pac-12 schools that can compete with them. The Auburn and Oregon game went right down to the wire. Could have gone either way, just like Auburn lost to Minnesota. Could have gone either way. And you also had the Georgia, and they played Baylor. That was not a packed house. That was down in the South. It's always going to be up to those teams that want to go and play.
That was a bowl game in Auburn and Georgia, but I think a couple of years ago, Alabama played USC down in Texas, packed house. They won. This last year, Auburn had Oregon in. They beat them. So it's not about the closest of the game. It's win and lose. It doesn't make any difference whether it's a 20-point spread or a 1-point spread. It's a W or an L at the end of the day. But what I'm saying is that the SEC invites teams in because they can afford to. They can afford to pay teams to come out and play them where you're not getting that on the West Coast. You're not going to see Washington State bring a team across the country and play. You're not going to see Stanford have somebody other than Notre Dame, which is a regional rivalry that they have over the decades, come out and play them. They're not going to bring somebody other than them. You're not going to have Oregon bring somebody out. You're just not going to get – Arizona's not going to bring anybody out. Arizona State is not going to bring anybody out to play them.
That doesn't make any sense, Big C. You just had the University of Washington bring out LSU a couple of years ago. Oklahoma's come out.
I'm talking about in this last – you're talking about a couple of years ago.
I know, but you know
We're talking about what you do every year.
Right, but you know
every year, not a couple of years ago, every year. SEC, every team in the SEC brings in 2 teams a year that are not regional games.
Now that's
non-conference games is what I'm saying. The Pac-12 does not do that.
That's not true at all. I'm telling you, Oklahoma State came out last year and played Oregon State. We've had the University of Oklahoma come out to Oregon. USC has played everybody. They've even beaten up on Auburn and Arkansas the last time they scheduled. Once USC beat Auburn, I think it was Auburn 23-0 at Jordan Hare.
Last year,
yeah.
Which Pac-12 teams brought non-regional Power 5 schools out to the West Coast to play them last year?
And I'm telling you, the schools do it all the time. USC just finished home in Texas.
Last year.
The schedule, as you know, is not made year to year. It's made years in advance. I mean, that's just common sense, Big C. You can Google that too. There's no way Pac-12 teams are ducking SEC teams. But I'll give you this bone to wrestle with. If you look at the NCAA, the ACC, Atlantic Coast Conference, and the Big Ten Conference, they combined to spend nearly $1 million last year. Think about this. Not getting fans to come to games, but lobbying the lawmakers in an effort to shape laws in their liking for athletes to receive endorsement money. The reason that happens, Big C, is instead of that paperback that's all passed around in a lot of those southern schools, like you think paperbacks tossed around in the parking lot, you know what I'm talking about. They're trying to get some above-the-table legal money. Well, so why is the SEC and the Big Ten sending in lawmakers to make sure they can pay money legally to athletes, Big C? I'm sure the Pac-12 is not far behind. Your thoughts?
Well, what they're doing, Charlton, is making sure that it's legislated properly. They're taking the high ground, being in the forefront of doing that. They don't want to leave it to state, Charlton. They're trying to make sure that it's a national law that all university students get paid equitably, and that's coming from the South and up in the Northeast. Is that they're taking the high road to say we want to get the players paid, and so we're going to pay lobbyists in Washington, D.C. to make sure that this is done properly, that everybody's money is going to be even across the board.
Yeah.
Not to say that one state pays more or less than another state, Charlton. They want to make sure that all student athletes are treated the same economically.
Yeah, and I agree with that, Big C. We've talked about that happening for many, many years, especially with March Madness coming up. But I also want to thank Gavin Newsom, the governor of California. California law, it will go into effect in 2023. States such as Georgia, Minnesota, Florida, New York, and South Carolina, they already have, legislation going through their states also, their states' assemblies. I think that's a good thing. But in none of those assemblies, in none of those lobbyists, are they trying to lobby more people to come to a game. All of this is about TV revenue and where the TV money is going to go, and how all that money gets there is through contracts. It's not because the team went 10-0 or 5-5 on the season. It's just about getting that TV revenue, and a lot of it has gone to the South. And I would contend this too. I think POTUS even mentioned in his State of the Union that he's going to try to woo more of the money into the historically black colleges. As you well know, the most of the talent in college football, it comes out of the southern states. That's largely African-American labor, Big C, free labor I'll call that. And so anytime they get paid, I'm for that. But I think that the southern schools have done a better job in recruiting kids to stay home, whether it's exploitation or not. And that's where the money is going. It's going to be nice to see the kids get some of that money too, Big C. Your thoughts on that?
Well, college football has always been the same, whether it's exploitation or not. It's about where kids want to go and they feel the most comfortable at. But the bottom line is kids want to win. They want national exposure. Everybody in college athletics, I'm going to say at least 80%, always have aspiration to get to become a professional athlete, Charlton.
Yep.
And your best opportunity to become a professional athlete is where you have the best exposure and the best opportunity as far as competition.
Yeah.
And that's what the southern states have brought in the last couple decades. When you look at the national championships, you look at the All-Americans, you look at the games on television in prime time, the Southern states have led the way in that. It's gotten away from the West Coast because of time difference. And the West Coast has chose not to play in the favor of athletes. They've chose to play in favor of corporate, and so they've lost that toehold on being primetime television.
And I think that's part in every marketplace. I would agree. If you don't have you were asking earlier, why did some of the programs in California go away? There's at least 10 of them. We mentioned them earlier: Chico State, Sonoma State. There was Humboldt State. There's Cal State Hayward. There was Santa Clara, St. Mary's College over in Moraga. They went away. I mean, Cal State Long Beach, Cal State Fullerton. There's a lot. I believe Azusa Pacific went away also. So what was it? UOP went away. So a lot of programs went away, and I don't think they're going to come back anytime soon. But what they lost...
But in the southern states, Charlton,
yeah,
they've been adding college football programs in the southern states, not disappearing. They've been adding new university football programs in the southern states over the last 12 to 15 years. There's been a ballooning of college football teams.
Yeah, it may have been a ballooning in college football teams, but I don't know if we can track the graduation rate to be in correlation. It's a good old boy network. They've learned to exploit a lot of kids, Big C. So just because they play football doesn't mean they're going to get jobs when they come out of there. And I think that's something that the SEC has not addressed, and they don't want to address, because that would show a negative cloud on those conferences down south. That's a lot of stuff that you can Google and prove that fact.
Do you know the graduation rate of the Pac-12?
I'm telling you, more kids out of the Pac-12 get a college education.
Do you know the graduation rate? Not more kids, but do you know the graduation rate of the Pac-12 versus the SEC?
I will Google that, and I can tell you that it's higher. And one thing to also prove that it's higher, when it comes to overall academic and athletic success, not just one, the Pac-12 schools have won more. Actually, the Pac-12 conference has done better than any other conference in the country when it comes to overall academic and athletic success. And I'm sure most parents care about the academic success more than their kids being exploited to play football in the SEC conference. That's a fact, Big C. So this thing that the SEC and the ACC and Big Ten are doing, the Pac-12 is doing too, they're making legislation come in, and they're going to make sure that you pay these players whatever they call equitable, Big C, but at least they're putting that on the table. And that's not a bad thing as long as it's implemented, if that makes any sense, Big C. Your thoughts?
Well, players have always been paid on the college athletic scale. It's just a matter of how much you've gotten and where you've gotten it from. It's nothing new. It's just a matter now, Charlton, they want to be able to tax these athletes. And so don't think that they're doing this because they're thinking about the well-being of the athletes.
Oh, yeah.
They couldn't tax or track the money that athletes were being paid before.
Yeah.
But the highest graduation rate, as far as the greatest economic value on a college scholarship, still comes out of the Ivy League, and no one talks about them.
No one talks about them. That's a very good point. And why don't they talk about them? And the fact of the matter is because they're not bringing in money for your school. And that way the TV networks don't show up and say, let me give Harvard or Brown University, what's it called? What do they get? $44 million, you said SEC team split. Is that what they split from TV revenue? Not because the fans were buying tickets. TV did that. And how many athletes down there in the SEC are Caucasian that's helping to make that money? Most of those teams are dominated by African Americans. And they're the last hired and first fired. And I think you and I both understand that, Big C. So does that make any sense? The Ivy League will never compete because they're not going after the African American athlete, Big C. Your thoughts?
Well, when you think about academic institutions in the SEC, you got to think about Vanderbilt, Charlton, which is just like Stanford of the West Coast. It's hard to get into.
Yeah.
And yet they have a high economic turnover from the athletes that attend that university. So there's a couple schools, Wake Forest, also down in the South, Charlton. That's in the ACC.
Yeah.
When you think about academic standards, Duke is another one of those schools with academic standards. So there's as many academic standards in the south part of the United States as there is on the West Coast.
Yeah, there may be some, but just not as much. That's why the Pac-12 has won what's called the President's Cup when you have overall academic and athletic prowess. And people can Google that too. But I think we're on to something because we talk about it, and I love that advocacy that we have for the student athlete. I also want to bring up something that I think is important. NCAA president, Mark Emmerichs, he urged Congress to step in and put restrictions on college athletes. Think about this, Big C. This good boy making $1 million a year. He's putting restrictions, urging Congress to do it. Not the fans, but urging Congress to put restrictions on college athletes. We just said that the majority of athletes that make money and make these athletic departments have a $100 million athletic funds, they're young black boys and girls. And here's the president of the United States urging Congress to put restrictions on college athletes' ability to earn money from endorsements, from telling the Senate committee on Tuesday that federal action was needed to maintain uniform standards in college sports. They didn't say that about Ivy League schools. They're focusing on the schools that have predominant black athletes, Big C, because they're the ones making the money. That's amid player-friendly laws approved in California and under consideration in other states. Why is the president against the people that he's supposed to oversee making money like him, Big C? Your thoughts?
Well, it's not that he's against them making money, Charles. He's trying to get it regulated. So there's not a huge disparity in what players make in college athletics, whether it's women or men. He's looking for an equitable playing field, and that's the reason why he's asking Congress to step in and create the laws that are going to be national laws that are going to regulate the amount of income that players can earn off their likeness or any other way, Charlton, in college athletics. You think about having schools, just like we talk about the SEC, where you got schools with the most dominant athletic program in the country economically, and the amount of money that they could pay their players versus a team like in the Mountain West, where they're making maybe 1/20th as each football program is what they're making in the SEC. So that's what he's talking about, not having that huge disparity on what athletes can make, because if it's not like that, you think the SEC is strong now, Charlton? Give it 5 years and see how strong the SEC can be if the money's not regulated and they make more than twice the amount of any other conference in America.
Well, this is the same gentleman that fought back on colleges being able to get money into athletes for their likeliness. He's fought it many years, but now that governors all over the country are starting to say we want to be a part of that, at least to equalize and add some sense of fairness, now he's going to come onto the other side of the fence. That's amazing how people change colors and they act like they're doing it for the benefit of the schools. But they fought against those schools for many, many years. So I think it's disingenuous, but we'll see what happens as things unfold. You can follow Big C Sports 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on the #1 podcast network in the universe, iHeartRadio podcast. You can follow Big C Sports on Apple Podcasts. You can follow Big C Sports on Google Podcasts. You can follow Big C Sports on Speaker.com and the apps that I really love called Google and Alexa. Just say Google or Alexa, play Big C Sports Podcast. You will hear from our sponsors. You will hear welcome to the show. I will introduce Big C as the Mystic, and he'll do his thing. And I really appreciate the way things are growing with Big C Sports Podcast. You can also follow Big C Sports Podcast on Xfinity, Comcast TV, Roku TV, Apple TV, Fire TV, and a lot of smart TVs all over the universe. Everybody's looking for a way to do better in life. I like when lawmakers, and that's another good point that I just thought about. Everything in America happens because of the law. That's why we have a court system. When lawmakers get involved, Big C, just like Brown versus Board of Education and Plessy versus Ferguson, it's the law that creates opportunity, not some good boys who benefited from ostracizing a group of people. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, Charlton, laws are out there to always mold and structure everything we do in society to give everyone an equitable chance. And that's what the NCAA is trying to do now, give an equitable chance to all its student athletes in the opportunity to earn income off of their likeness or even the sport that they're in. And there's always going to be a huge disparity when you look at the dominance of the Power 5 conferences versus the rest of the conferences in America, saying that we don't have a chance to make the type of income that they do. And so this is only creating fairness by going through the government sources, Charlton, to say these are going to be national laws that are in place, just like the scholarship law. Every school is allotted X number of scholarships. And so if you put everything streamlined to be the same, whether you're in New York, California, whether you're in Montana, whether you're in Texas, then all student athletes get treated the same.
And I think that's a good thing. But again, it's funny how guys have fought this for many, many moons, Big C, and now that the law got involved, they say, well, now that we have no choice, let's figure out a way to make it fair. If they had their way, the law never would have gotten involved with it. And speaking of fairness, I want to just go back to, you know how we talked about Bobby Knight yesterday, being at Indiana for the first time in 20 years. I remember he did have an undefeated program at Indiana also that won a national championship back in the day. When you think about college basketball and March Madness coming up, Michigan State They tumbled out of the top 25. The Spartans, thanks to a 3-game losing skid under Coach Tom Izzo, they became the first preseason #1 team to go unranked since the Kentucky Wildcats did it. Big C, that was way back in 2014, Big C. Your thoughts?
Well, hard times have turned on Michigan State University. The football coach resigned, based on a scandal just a couple of weeks ago, Charlton. They haven't been able to replace him. Now you look at the slide with Tom Izzo and the Michigan State Spartan basketball team, Charlton. They're only 16-8 on the season, and now they're out of the top 25. And being preseason ranked #1 and to have 8 losses on your schedule, this shows the landscape of college basketball of how it's changed. We talked about yesterday that there's 5 teams in the top 10 that were not even in the top 10 in preseason ranking, but it's about how you're playing on a night-to-night basis in college basketball.
Yeah, and just like AAU basketball has taken a lot of top high school basketball players, and they can go to smaller schools, and they're just as good as the teams that are in the Power 5. And so oftentimes you'll find more powerhouse programs being knocked off because competition is so good all over the country. Big C, I know you like ice, and I know sometimes people are skating on thin ice when they say, I believe that all the colleges should be able to make money for their athletes in their likeness, when a couple of years ago they said no, they didn't want to have that. I want to talk about the NHL, National Hockey League. Would you believe we are officially locked in on the 700 watch for your friend Alex Ovechkin, the longtime goal-scoring legend of the Washington Capitals, Big C? He currently sits at 698 goals for his career. Ovechkin's the NHL's number 8 all-time on the scoring list at just 34 years old. He looks to join the likes of the great Wayne Gretzky, Gordie Howe, and so Brett Hull, and many other, Philip Esposito, Mike Gardner in the Elite 700 Club. And I know he's going to get it before the weekend, Big C. Your thoughts?
Well, he's been stuck on 698 for the past week. So Ovechkin, the pressure is on him to join that elite club. A lot of people want to think that he may be the greatest goal scorer of all time in the NHL, but the great one, Wayne Gretzky, can never be eclipsed as far as what Wayne did. When you think about Wayne's one season total of 94 goals, Charlton, that will never come close to the best that Ovechkin has ever done. Has been 68 in a single season. So Wayne Gretzky stands in rarefied air. He's the signature of the NHL as far as overall goals. And then when you think about assists, Wayne Gretzky has over 1,900 assists in his career. Ovechkin only has 500. So he can never come close to Gretzky. But joining that 700 goal-scoring club, Charlton, the leaders of college, of NHL hockey in history, he'll become a part of that sometime soon.
Well, I'm sure that he will. I wish him nothing but the best. Hockey's a tough sport, especially riding around. I guess not riding around, but skating around on thin ice. He has to get that record. I hope he'll do it by this weekend. You can follow Big C Sports 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on the #1 podcast network in the universe, iHeartRadio podcast. Really appreciate that. I know we had a heated discussion about football, basketball, baseball, whether it's Pac-12 conference or SEC, the Big 10, the Big 12, Big C, Mountain West Conference, whoever it is, everybody has their own choice and their own flavor. And I love spirited conversations about college sports and athletes and what it's going to take for people to get to that next level. And I do wish and hope that the legislation can come in place that will start paying players and not just talking about it. But it all starts with a conversation. So I really appreciate you, and I've been doing that for many, many years. Big C, back in the day, there was a man by the name of Drew Boudini Brown. He was known as Muhammad Ali's right-hand man, and he would always tell Ali, with all you got to use, how can you lose? Rumble, young men, rumble. Big C, what are you looking forward to in this boys' universe?
Well, Charlton, I'm going to take a page from that boxing annal that you just talked about. And in this date in black history 30 years ago, Charlton, everybody remembers what they were doing in America. It was the day that a 42-1 long shot knocked off the heavyweight champion of the world when Buster Douglas upset Mike Tyson in the Tokyo Dome over in Tokyo, Japan, Charlton.
I remember seeing that. Almost upset. I almost skated on my thin ice, Big C. I said, what in the world is the world coming to? But you can win, too, every Monday through Friday at 5 and 6 p.m. worldwide when you follow Big C Sports on the Big C Sports Network, on the #1 network in the United States of America. And Big C Sports has been voted the #1 sports show in the universe, according to Big C and them good old boys down south. as we always tell you, there's never, ever an excuse for domestic violence. If you know any man or woman going through that garbage, please pick up the phone and call 911, because no man or woman should ever have to go through that garbage on their own. And as we always tell you on every Big C Sports Show, we thank you, we appreciate you, and we hope that you have a super fantastic day.